Welcome to Two Therapists Talking. The hope for this podcast is to talk about important issues related to couples and individuals who are struggling in their lives with many different issues. I'm David Thompson, a marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Sherie Christensen, marriage and family therapist. Please join us as we explore these issues together, and we hope you will learn and be enlightened along the way. Come find us at twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.
Hi, and welcome back to Two Therapists Talking. I'm David.
And I'm Sherie.
And we are back again, continuing our healthy and unhealthy grieving series of episodes. This is episode 3.
Mm-hmm. You're going to have times when you're going through and it's going to be a little less effective, but that's okay. Just to be aware.
Definitely. We are not saying you're doing something wrong,
Yep.
because grieving is a very difficult process. But it's helpful to say, okay, well, I'm doing this a lot, and they're saying that this is maybe a more effective way to do it. So
Yep.
if you can, based on where you're at. So no judgment, no criticism ever.
Yep. Just awareness.
Just awareness. Listen as we go through this and see what helps. So we made it all the way, if you remember, stages of grieving: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yep.
DABDA. That's an easy way to remember it. That's how I remember it. And so this is not linear like we've talked about before. We can bounce all over the place in this. What we mostly wanted to do is just give you some ideas for what is more effective, and then talk a little bit first about what's less effective. And we made it to depression. So we are on the final two, depression and acceptance. And we want to start with unhealthy.
Yes.
Because that's, I just think it's a better way to talk about it, to start there.
Right.
So unhealthy depression. Okay, well, this isn't even grieving necessarily now, right? Unhealthy depression.
Yes, this applies to many different spaces, not just grieving.
Yep.
But yes, when you're in that depression space that is a little less effective in terms of the grieving process, it's going to look like giving up. It's going to look like not doing your self-care things.
Right.
Whether that's nutrition, whether that's rest, whether that's exercise, whether that's nurturing yourself spiritually, all of these different self-care things that help fill us and ground us. When you either give up on them or stop doing them for whatever reason, that's when we go, okay, wait just a minute. Let's maybe think about that, right?
Yep. Yeah, another way, in addition to stop caring more or less for ourselves, is for other responsibilities. And this is pretty telltale sign, right? You just withdraw. It's like you don't care as much about different things. You're not doing things that you need to do, or even just things you're used to doing.
Right.
Expectations people might have for you, but you just aren't. You're just not doing it.
Right.
So you can tell, right, when someone's mourning and grieving because they pull away. And we do need to slow down. This is a very healthy thing.
Right.
To slow things down.
You're definitely going to, and when we talk about the more effective ways, you're definitely going to be able to see that, like that space of slowing down, that space of not trying to just push yourself through things and giving yourself a little bit more space. But when you just completely stop,
right,
and you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of, kids' responsibilities, house, like things are just kind of going downhill, you're just not doing any of it, then we want to be aware of that. Just be, okay, let's check in on that.
Yep.
So again, with that, as you can imagine, as you could think through that, that's also going to look like isolating and withdrawing from others. Yeah. Again, there's healthy ways of doing that. There's effective ways of doing that when you need space to grieve. But when you're completely checking out, isolating, withdrawing, all of that, then we want to be aware and careful about that.
Right. Yep. And often also you will, if you're in a less effective space, you might ruminate about death or suicide. And you can tell, again, this is something that we're probably all somewhat familiar with, friends or family who have been in this place. It's an idea that kind of doesn't go away, and it's an energy thing as well. It's an
Right.
attitude thing as well.
Right.
Not just, it would be easier if I wasn't here, but it continues and continues.
Yeah, it's kind of like a next step level
Yeah,
than just, oh, it'd just be easier if I wasn't here, or, oh, I just don't want to do life anymore right now.
right. It's almost like an obsession. You're really becoming fixated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to differentiate between like having an occasional thought about that or those thoughts like we're saying that just, oh, I just don't want to do life or I don't want to be here right now versus that ruminating space
Yep.
versus really thinking about it a lot and focusing on that a lot. And then another thing to consider is if you're neglecting those in your care. So if you've got pets or children or other people that are relying on you and you're not meeting basic needs.
Right.
I think there's a difference between, taking a step back and maybe, not throwing the ball for your dog for
Right.
3 hours a day, whatever,
Right.
versus not feeding your dog, right?
Right,
Same
right.
thing with your children. There may be times that you're grieving and you aren't going to attend all the activities or they're going to get to watch a little more TV for, a day or
Right.
two, or even longer, as opposed to I'm not
There's
meeting
not
basic
food.
needs.
Yeah.
Yes, there's
Yep.
not food in the house. We're not, they're injured and I'm not taking care of them, right?
Right.
Not putting them to bed, those types of things.
Right. And another way we can tell sometimes there's this despair, we call it without intervention, where there's not coming back out of it, there's not doing things, it's just despair, and it stays
Right.
in despair, and it stays in despair for a long time, which again is kind of relative, right? Grieving and mourning, you could say, is despair.
Yes.
And it's hard to put time frames on some of this stuff, but again, you got to have a sense of this. And if it's too long to where you see this neglect, you see this rumination, you see some of these other things in
Yeah.
combination, then it's less effective.
Yeah. You're not kind of surfacing at all, right? There's sort of that long-term hopelessness rather than either short-term or momentary, like I'm having a hopeless moment or a hopeless evening, and then
Right.
there's some pickup on the other end. And then of course the last one that we want to talk about, which is a serious one, is having a suicide plan or
Right.
attempts.
Right.
Right. And of course, we talk about this is grieving in general. So there's
Right.
you grieve and should grieve about many different things, but especially if the grief is around a suicide of someone that you know or a loved one. Those suicide ones are things that we talked about are much either the rumination or plans or attempts are things that you want to be much more aware of because the risk of suicide goes way up for people who know someone or have a loved one who has attempted or committed suicide.
Right.
So definitely make sure that if you're grieving or the grieving of people around you is related to this, you want to have an extra awareness of that and be checking on that more
Yeah.
than you would otherwise.
Yeah. And it's okay to check in with yourself often and try to process, what your feelings are, how deep those feelings are, as much as you can, which is hard to do when you're in it. And hopefully this isn't just, for you. This is also for your
Right.
awareness of family, your friends, and people around you. So
So now that we've talked about that, let's talk about what is, because it sounds funny, what does
I know.
healthy depression look
healthy
like?
depression, more
Or-
effective depression.
More effective depression, right? Because again, this is just a stage of grieving. So let's look at that. One of the things that we want to look at is noticing when you have that low energy and being able to conserve it for spaces of internal processing. So you do want to recognize, I'm in a grieving space. I'm going to have much less emotional, physical resources available to me. So I'm deliberately choosing, to slow down. I'm choosing to conserve that.
Right.
So that I can work through that and process things that I need to process. And sometimes when we think about that, we think, oh, well, there's supposed to be some checklist of things that I process. So I sit down and I go, okay, now I need to think about this, and I process that, and I'm going to have a checkbox. I think a lot of times with grieving, and really actually a lot of deeply stressful things that we go through in life, that conservation for internal processing, it's almost, some of that is either subconscious processing that we're doing, or it's a processing that we just need to give ourselves the space to do it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It's not like we're gonna, okay, so I have to check off these 4 processing things, and then I will have finished my processing. This isn't a linear pattern. What we're gonna do, we just want to give yourself that extra space. You just want downtime.
Yeah, want and need, and you're giving yourself permission, because we are so hard on ourselves that it's almost a more effective way through this grieving depression stage is to say it's okay. It's okay to be here. And one of those also, and we give this advice, you've heard this before, put off major decisions while you process grief.
Yes.
This is very similar to step 1 in steps to recovery. If you discover something infidelity in the relationship with your spouse or partner, step 1 is take your time, slow down. You don't have to make any major decisions. It's the same thing here. So giving yourself permission to process. Process is just a great way to describe it.
Yep.
This is a lot going on, and I need to just kind of take my time. And there's a cool word for this. Sherry's going to share.
Nurturing.
I was thinking of another one.
What were you thinking of? Tell me.
Nurturing what?
Just yourself, giving yourself that space.
Yeah.
And that time, and slowing it down and recognizing, you don't, okay, tell me what your word is. I'm like.
Cocooning.
Oh, yes. Yep.
What is cocooning? It sounds cool. We don't use it very much.
It does. Just wrapping yourself in the space you need, right? Like protecting yourself, right? That's sort of the metaphor, right? When that caterpillar goes in and protects itself, wraps itself up, protects itself so that it can go through this complete and utter change of every cell of their body. Right. And that's, I think, sometimes what it feels like.
Absolutely what it feels
in
like.
Deep grief, right?
Yep.
It really feels like your entire life is changing. Every cell is going to have to be restructured in a different way. And so, to be able to cocoon yourself and nurture yourself, give yourself that time and space, that's okay.
That's okay.
And it's actually way more than okay. It's really important.
Yep.
You don't have to go to everything. You don't have to attend every event. You don't have to.
You can say no.
Yes. Do all the things that everybody around you is maybe wanting or expecting you to do because, hey, it's been like 3 months since that person passed away. Right. Everybody else is kind of moving on, and you're still needing that space. So take it. Absolutely cocoon yourself.
Yep. Cocooning. I like it. We need to use it more.
Yes, we do.
Really effective is to just cry, to feel hurt, sad, express it, release it, get it out. It's harder for guys, I think, because it feels maybe weak or vulnerable, certainly.
Right, our lovely culture that tells us these things.
Right. But it really, how many times have you cried and felt better, or heard somebody say, and then I had a really good cry and I felt much better afterwards. So you're allowed to do this, just to cry and release it and express. It's one of the best ways we have of releasing emotions is expressing them.
Yes. And even looking at, you may have seen this, but they've studied tears, right? And tears in different circumstances right? Tears of happiness, tears of frustration. Like, anyway, they've looked at these tears like under the microscope, and they have completely different chemical compositions. So you're literally, as you're, when you're crying in these grieving processes, you're literally releasing stuff that your body needs to release in that process. So do it. You're literally changing the chemistry of your body when you do. It's not just an emotional thing. It's a physical composition change. So,
there you go.
So another one is noticing and addressing triggers.
Right.
For current loss, for past losses, we talk about past losses, you want to be aware of how they might be connected to a current loss, right?
Right.
So, for example, if it's a relationship current loss, am I going to get triggered from this, death of a parent or,
Right.
Estrangement from a sibling or something like that might be getting triggered now with the current relationship loss. So be aware of those, aware of ways that you can address those.
Yep. And if this takes good awareness, if your solitude becomes isolation, make sure you're getting help. You're asking for help, even though that might be hard to do, because it's going to be kind of what you want to do is to isolate.
Right.
And there's a difference. It's like being alone and being lonely. There's a difference between isolation and solitude. Solitude is a little more positive. The idea is this cocooning, nurturing. So if you are isolating, please ask for help.
Yeah. And it's okay if it takes a little bit to figure out what that is. Yeah. Sometimes we feel like we're choosing that cocooning, and then after a little while we realize, oh, I'm not.
Right.
And that also actually doesn't necessarily mean that you weren't cocooning in the first place.
Right.
It just might mean that it has slipped into that after this space of cocooning, right? So it's just always good to just sort of be aware of where you're falling on those things.
Yep.
And then the last one we wanted to talk about with this is radical self-care. I love that. I love this phrase, radical self-care. So again, take time for rest, take time for nutrition, exercise, spiritual nurturing, prayer, all of those things. Give yourself that space because you need that healing, right? You need to be nurturing. You need to be cocooning yourself and healing.
Yes. Perfect. Moving on. Acceptance. Okay, here's our last one. Unhealthy or less effective? We like less effective.
Less effective, yes.
Less effective acceptance is pseudo acceptance, pretend acceptance. You pretend as if you've accepted a loss, but you really haven't processed through the stages of grief, which we see a lot because, again, that seems like a strength.
Right. Oh, I've got this. Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
Is it fine?
Is it fine? Have you done any of these other stages? Have we done any of this yet?
Have you been completely out of control, sobbing? So don't pretend like everything's okay. It's actually best to just explore your feelings, get them out, use some of these other techniques.
It's okay for it to not be okay.
Yep.
So again, going along with that, like acting as if you're not affected by it, that nothing's wrong, saying all the right words to other people, minimizing how painful it is. All of these different kinds of things.
Yeah. And another really interesting one is maybe a premature forgiveness just to keep the peace.
Yes. Yeah. For example, if this is in a relationship.
Right.
For sure.
They put pressure on you maybe to let go, to move on.
Yeah. Why aren't
and you're
you
not
over
ready
this
to.
Yet?
Yep. And so you prematurely forgive maybe for the expectation, but maybe that's not good for you.
I mean, also, frankly, that's not actually real forgiveness.
Right.
Because if you don't have the trust and the boundaries and the different, the healing in place, then it's not actually forgiveness. It's just kind of stuffing stuff. And you can legitimately feel like you are forgiving. But if you don't have the things in place that you need to be able to do that, then it isn't.
Right.
It isn't actually.
Exactly.
So being okay with just relaxing into that and saying, nope, it's okay. I'm going to take the time that I need to work through that and either build trust or setting boundaries or whatever is needed in that place
Yep.
is really critical. Doing that will help you get to the actual real acceptance.
Right. Yeah. Kind of like when you just decline to process what happened. Same idea.
Yep.
We're not really processing.
Yep.
We'd like to think we are, and maybe often it's like, well, it's been time, and time alone is all you need, right?
Right.
Not exactly. We got to process these. You'll want to process these, otherwise it hangs on a lot longer than anybody wants it to.
Yeah, and you can see that with someone who you can look back on your life, or you can just look at your life and see people who have gone through the same experience, right? The loss of a loved one, for example, and 5 years later, one person has really healed and progressed and done all the things, and then you see someone else that is completely lost still.
Right.
Because they haven't actually done that work.
Right.
Or they've gotten stuck in the process somewhere.
And it can be scary work, so
yeah,
it makes sense why we might avoid it. But that's not healthy or effective.
Yes. Less
as best
effective.
We can, right?
Yes. Yeah. And same thing with people who've had betrayal. Like you could see some people that have just done this beautiful job of working hard on themselves and processing and going through these stages and everything. And then you see others that 5 years later are still
right.
so upset and so angry and so triggered all of the time because they're just not actually processing what's going on and not giving themselves that space so that they can move to a place of actual acceptance.
Right.
And I think the last thing to really important to note as we're looking at acceptance is an acceptance that other people, like not being willing to accept that other people have a different grieving process.
Right.
That their timeline is going to look different than yours. They're going to need more time in some of these stages than you will, or they're going to be there at different times than you're going to be there.
Right.
And so just recognizing that and realizing that's important, and it's okay for other people to be having their own process about it.
Yep.
So when we don't do that, that's unhealthy, that's less effective. And so obviously doing that is going to be more effective, right?
More effective acceptance. Well, this is one of my favorite words. Here are some ways that acceptance is more effective. We practice being open to changes and new growth. So we're not afraid of change. We're not afraid of what this will look like. And we, as best we can, remain open to it. And that's sometimes, practice is a good word for that.
Yes. Yes. Not going to be a zero-sum game. Either you're doing it or not.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes a lot of work to practice. Another way to have more effective acceptance is to intentionally ritualize what has been lost.
Right.
So you may create an anniversary, death anniversary where you do something, or birthdays, or you may have a ritual that you do letting go of balloons, or creating some of these spaces where you can have some connective rituals around the loss.
Right.
That, again, if you're looking at betrayal or something like that, can be other things that you're doing, like a recommitment ceremony or other rituals in terms of letting go and moving on.
Right. Very meaningful. We also can explore the larger meaning, deep compassion, spirituality, this idea that as painful as the loss is, it actually can inspire growth and fulfillment and satisfaction in other ways.
Yeah.
And so there's a deeper experiencing all around, not just the negative, but also the positive.
Right. Yeah. Having meaning is one of the most critical spaces in healing.
Right. I mean, we hear,
loss.
right, if we did not die, life would not have the meaning that it has. If death was not a thing, life itself would be different. And so there is meaning to be obtained from the losses that we suffer.
Yep, for sure. And part of that is accepting the losses and looking for ways that life is different now, that life is better.
We talk about this all the time, right? So meaning in suffering is what causes suffering to cease, or finding purpose in pain is how we transform the pain. And acceptance really is how we can transcend a lot of the pain in our life. And so...
And gratitude is a part of that too.
Really big part of it. Gratitude for what's good because of the losses, with the losses. It seems a little odd at first, but when you start to think about it... I mean, and I think we've talked about this before in other episodes, but for me, that has been one of the most transformative things in my life is kind of that moment where I decided that in whatever losses I was going to experience, that I would really lean into gratitude, not just for like things that were happening or other things that I could think of in my life that I could be grateful, but literally having gratitude for the challenging circumstance itself. Right.
Like I could get on that soapbox all day. I think I have before, but that gratitude is so connected to the meaning and acceptance and moving on from and through grief and loss. Right.
And learning to honor this new wisdom that's come from this process. Like Sherry's talking about, this becomes gifts to others.
Yes, gifts for yourself and gifts for others. You use that, what you're learning and that meaning that you've made, and you're able to use that to help other people, other circumstances, as well as yourself. And that is, in and of itself, a meaning.
Right.
Right?
That you make from this, yes. Absolutely.
So that is grieving. We weren't expecting it to take 3 episodes, but of course that's usually how it goes for us.
That's how it goes, but there's a lot to cover, and it's really good. So thank you for joining us, and as always, we really hope this is helpful and appreciate you listening.
Yep. Join us next time. Thank you for listening to Two Therapists Talking. We look forward to sharing more conversations with you. Connect with us at twotherapisttalking.com or email podcast@twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.